Welcome to Section 3 of our course on age and aging and COVID-19. So here we're going to talk about what we need to do to move on beyond COVID in terms of long-term care in Canada. We'll talk about the context of societal beliefs and attitudes towards aging and old age. And then we'll have some comments as well about ageism, which we've been talking about throughout this course, not only for older people, but also for younger people. So what we realize in Canada is all the systemic vulnerabilities about the long-term care system that were exposed with COVID. It's important to recognize, and some of the headlines here certainly capture this, both the inherent neglect and the ageism in the practices of care facilities, especially the older ones, housing poorer populations of older people. And frankly, the worst of the nursing homes in Ontario and Quebec were in the for-profit sector. Says a lot about our policy context. The proposed solutions recognize the invisibility of long-term care, how in many cases long-term care is a private trouble that families and individuals have to address when an older person becomes frail and requires more care than can be provided at home, and doesn't often have the wherewithal or may not to actually purchase those services at home, or their care needs have gone beyond what could be provided at home. What we're seeing in this current recognition of what happened in long-term care, particularly in Ontario and Quebec, is a shift, at least for now, to consider the state of long-term care in Canada as a public issue of fundamental concern for society. We don't know how long this is going to last on the radar in terms of public issues in Canada. But you can see here the headlines in various Canadian papers emphasize how demanding this is going to be, how we as a society demonstrate the value of care for older people. You'll see here a whole series of screenshots of covers of different documents and reports that have been, all of these 7 are from the last 5 years alone, that address these issues of systemic vulnerabilities in the health and social care system and actions recommended. Even though they were written pre-COVID, they all convey an extraordinary sense of urgency about the challenges in long-term care in Canada. Look at the titles that are here on this slide. Dignity Denied, Before It Is Too Late, New Directions, The Future Is Now. Well, the future came along with COVID, and much of Canada was not ready in terms of long-term care. Now, one question that might be on your mind, why should we care about this? Do we really need to overhaul this sector? After all, only 7.1% of older people even live in long-term care facilities in Canada. But here's an interesting issue. That statistic is a cross-sectional measure at one moment in time of how many people are residing in a long-term care facility. We know, and we've talked about how long people may actually live, 20, 30, 40 or more years in later life. The estimates are that almost 70% of people over the age of 65 will need long-term care services at some point in our very long period of old age. Might be for a short point in time or period of time, post-operation or something like that. But a large percentage will need care at some point in time. The estimates are that women need longer care in general than men, 3.7 years. In long-term care, men 2.2 years. And the estimate is that while 30% of today's 65-year-olds may never need long-term care services, 20% will need these services for longer than 5 years. So yes, these questions are relevant, and yes, these questions matter. Now, the good news is that most people, as we know, if they live at all in a long-term care setting in later life, will actually live there for a comparatively short period of time. So for all of the rest of the elderly population in Canada, there's lots of information to guide us in terms of what we need to do. Look at just this smattering of reports from the World Health Organization. But we also know that gender and race and ethnicity and class and educational status and all the factors that we recognize as the social determinants of health, they, of course, will all play a large role in our experiences of old age, aging, and later life. That's important to recognize. We've also talked earlier in this particular class about the predominant, how more predominant old age is becoming. And it is an enduring feature of populations now. Population aging is an enduring feature of society. Look at the statistics here. By 2050, people over the age of 60 will comprise 22% of the world's population. We actually know today that there are more people on Earth right now over the age of 65 than under the age of 5. This tells us what the future will look like in terms of population aging. We know population is growing, that a large number of elderly people will characterize societies worldwide for much of your lifetimes, particularly for those of you in your 20s and 30s. My adulthood was spent as a baby boomer. You, however, will spend much of your adulthood living in a world of older people. And all you have to do is look at a graph such as this. Look at the population aged 80 and over. We're looking at numbers here, not proportions. And the growth in the size of that population in a century from 1950 through to 2050. And even if you think of the 25, 30 years between now and 2050, the number of older people over the age of 80, will be 2.5 times as many in 2050 as we have today. What's interesting is how, frankly, the card companies have recognized this. I found these cards in a little shop in Donegal, Ireland, probably 5 or 6 years ago. The population in Europe is certainly older than it is in Canada, and I thought how interesting that the card companies have come to realize that, for both women and for men, assuming that the shaving brush and the tie and the beer stein are meant to appeal to older men on their 100th birthday. So these are enduring features of populations that we're going to see more and more people over the age of 80 and a historically unprecedented number over 100. I put a screenshot here of the cover of the book, The 100-Year Life, because what is interesting are the estimates, particularly coming out of Denmark, that most babies born since 2000 will reach 100. A significant majority of them are projected to reach 100, particularly females, and we know they have higher life expectancy. So life expectancy is still increasing, slowly but steadily. So the book, The 100-Year Life, could definitely be the book for you in terms of thinking about your own futures. We won't go through all of the elements of this particular slide. I just wanted you to see that a survey had been done of Canadians age 18 and over and asking what they think about old age. And we'll see here an array of negative and positive images that may reflect some of what you think about what old age might be like for you or what it's like for older people. And I think it's interesting here to reflect on what's actually influencing your perspective here. Is it watching your parents or your grandparents or family members age? Is it the negative stereotypes and ageism of society that you think is a factor when you look at some of the more negative of these perspectives on later life? Or is it quite the opposite, in fact? More positive experience of knowing people as they grow older. But in any event, it's worth considering what the array of perspectives are here. It's also important to recognize that if you do have negative images of aging, one reason for that is that we frequently describe later life in terms of binaries. It's either this or it's that. We've already talked today about homogeneity of the population, the belief of the homogeneity of the population versus the reality of the heterogeneity of the population. We certainly see a whole host of contradictory images here, even though we know that the reality for most people is actually along a continuum somewhere in the middle. So one that we actually see is the last one, the epidemic of dementia, and the tidal wave of dementia that you will sometimes read happening, even though the proportions of people with dementia are actually decreasing worldwide. But you'll see, on the other hand, perceptions of older people as healthier than ever. 70 is the new 60 or 70 is the new 50. These contrasting images that really play into negative images, or the notion that everybody is one or the other and doesn't fall somewhere actually in between. I think it's also important to recognize that the aging of the population is an unprecedented historical achievement. I've been studying aging for multiple decades, and I have come to appreciate what an historical achievement it is. And yet there are some, and you will find this language of a catastrophe, of an apocalypse. The language is alarmist in relation to any of those discussions. Aging in the future, we know some of the ways in which your aging future, what it will look like, what we can anticipate. Certainly, we talk about the unprecedented co-longevity of generations. And what we're meaning here simply is how long generations will live together. 3, 4, 5 generations. Opportunities to actually know one's great-grandparents, or conversely, generations much younger than ourselves as we get older. We know there's tremendous fluidity in terms of who people say count as family for them in society today. We talk about fictive kin as sociologists. That's certainly a term we use. And we know that many of those ties can have more meaning for people than their biological kin. And that can actually be quite true as we get older. We also know that the going solo phenomenon, the rates of singlehood amongst people in their 20s and 30s, is higher than it's ever been in society. This is unprecedented as well. And we don't yet know what implications that may have for aging and for later life for individuals. You will also live not only in a world of older people, as I said a few moments ago, but you'll get to see what the world is like after the wave. That is, after that bulge of baby boomers, of whom I am one, move through the system. And what does the world look like after that? And we know that in some cases that will have implications in terms of labor and employment policies. And just as one quick example, during COVID, look how many physicians and nurses and care aides were called back into service to actually help when they'd retired. And we know there just isn't replacement in the system for them. But of course, the post-COVID world is also so hard to predict with the economic uncertainties. And I will also say the ideological biases that still exist. So, for instance, even in the province of Ontario, which has decried the conditions in long-term care facilities and expressed alarm about them, while doing that, the government of Ontario is still moving to privatize home care in the province of Ontario, with all of the challenges we know that will actually bring. We know that ageism got worse during the pandemic, and just what I've done here is just give you a smattering in connection to some of the headlines. We know that ageism existed before COVID. There was that okay boomer that was around before COVID, that pejorative meme mocking older people. But ageism got so much worse during COVID that the Martin Hyde, the UK sociologist, has actually referred to geronticidal language that was often used to describe older people. I've got some links here to headlines you might want to explore. For you, at younger ages, it's interesting how the story of COVID is still evolving. There's discussions now about some emerging evidence that COVID may impact younger people as well. We know that age matters in the experience of COVID in terms of potentially disproportional impacts for different age groups, and for the age group that many of you students represent, the labor force disruptions, the economic downturn, policy decisions will certainly affect your experiences as you move through the labor force. So the story of age and COVID is still unfolding, and time will tell. So to end, the future is aging. I hope you are leaving this section, this module, convinced of how the future is aging. Look here at these two very contrasting images of aging, both photographs that I've taken on my travels in Europe and New Zealand, one frail and bent, the other depicting a person much more vigorous and energetic. I hope that you will take away from our discussion today your understanding of the sociological imagination, of private troubles and public issues, at both individual and institutional levels to better understand narratives of aging, realities of later life, and how they intersect with class, gender, and race, and in the context of a pandemic. I also hope that you will have an understanding of the ageism inherent in the terminology about the elderly, how homogenizing it is of a population that can span such a long period of time. And it's really no more appropriate than our overgeneralizations about entire generations, be they X, Y, or Z. So we will end there with my best wishes to you, and thank you for your interest in this module on issues of age and aging in COVID-19 and society. Thank you.